Imagine you're the richest person in the world. Not just the richest person alive today, the richest person who has ever lived. You are so wealthy that when you walk into a city and start spending money, just being generous, just giving gifts, you accidentally destroy that city's economy for 12 years, just from shopping. Now imagine that most people today have never heard your name. That is the story of Mansa Musa. He was an emperor, a king of kings. He ruled an empire in West Africa in the 1300s that was larger than Western Europe, richer than anything Europe could dream of, and home to some of the greatest universities and libraries in the world. And then, history moved on and forgot him. Today, we're going to remember him. Section 2. Let's set the scene first. Let's get on the same page about when this happened. Ian, we're talking about the year 1324. That's almost 700 years ago. Now here's what was going on in Europe at the same time. Europe was not a great place to live in 1324. The Black Death, the most devastating plague in human history, was just 20 years away. It would eventually kill half of Europe's population. Most people were peasants. They farmed land they didn't own, gave most of what they grew to a lord, and hoped for a decent harvest. The biggest city in England, London, had maybe 80,000 people. Paris had around 200,000 on a good day. Churches were the biggest buildings most people had ever seen. Most Europeans lived their entire lives within a few miles of where they were born. Here is the modern parallel. Think of a struggling neighborhood in your city. Small houses, not much money. And people working hard but not getting very far. That's basically 14th century Europe. Now imagine, on the other side of the Sahara Desert, there is a city of 1 million people. Universities, libraries, hospitals, roads, trade routes connecting 3 continents. Gold so abundant that merchants traded it by the ton. That was West Africa. That was Mali. The Mali Empire wasn't built overnight. It started about 100 years before Mansa Musa was born, with a man named Sundiata Keita. Sundiata's story is worth knowing because it is the kind of story you'd put in a movie. He was a prince who couldn't walk as a child. Couldn't walk. His enemies laughed at him. His rivals pushed him out of his own country and sent him into exile. Then his homeland was conquered by a brutal warlord named Sumanguru, and Sundiata, the boy who couldn't walk, came back. When he united the clans, he raised an army, and in 1235, at a battle called the Battle of Karina, he defeated Sumanguru completely. He went from exiled, disabled child to emperor. Think of it like this. Imagine a kid at school who everyone picked on. They get expelled. They come back years later as the principal. That's Sundiata. And the empire he built? It was sitting on a gold mine, literally. Section 3. Where did all the gold come from? Now let's talk about money, because that's what makes this story staggering. The Mali Empire was wealthy for one simple reason. It was in exactly the right place. To the south of Mali's heartland were gold fields, the Bambouk, Bouré, and Galam regions that were producing enormous quantities of gold. Historians believe that by the early 14th century, Mali was the source of nearly half of all the gold in the Old World. The gold flowing to Europe, North Africa, and the Arab world. That is a breathtaking statistic. Half the world's gold supply coming from one empire. And gold wasn't just valuable back then. It was the foundation of every currency on Earth. Whoever controlled the gold controlled the global economy. Mali controlled the gold. But there was something else. Salt. Here is a simple way to understand why salt mattered so much in the medieval world. Before refrigerators existed, salt was the only reliable way to preserve food. Without it, meat and fish spoiled within days. Salt kept people alive through long winters and dry seasons. Communities that didn't have it needed it so desperately that they would trade almost anything for it. Mali's territory included major salt mines in the Sahara, particularly at a place called Tagaza. Salt from those mines was worth its weight in gold, literally. Arab travelers reported that in some parts of West Africa, people traded salt directly for gold, pound for pound. Here is a modern way to think about this. Imagine a single company that controlled the world's oil supply and the world's freshwater supply and sat in the middle of every major shipping lane on Earth. That is the kind of economic power Mali had. and every caravan that carried gold north or salt south had to pass through Mali's territory and pay taxes. By the time Mansa Musa became emperor in approximately 1312, the empire had been accumulating wealth for almost a century. He didn't create this fortune, he inherited it. And then he expanded it further by conquering 24 more cities and doubling the empire's territory. How wealthy was he? Historians are honest about this. We can't put an exact number on it. The medieval world didn't have bank accounts or stock portfolios we can measure against today's currency. Economists who have tried to convert his wealth into modern figures offer estimates of around $400 billion, though they are quick to add that his real power was even harder to measure. Because he didn't just own money, he controlled an entire economic system. As historian Rudolph Ware of the University of Michigan put it, this is the richest guy anyone has ever seen. That's the point. Section 4. The pilgrimage that shook the world. In 1324, Mansa Musa did something every Muslim is called to do at least once in their life. He went on the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. Most people who make the Hajj travel with family, save up money for the trip, and spend weeks in prayer and reflection. Mansa Musa also made the Hajj. He just brought 60,000 people with him. Let me describe what that looked like. At the very front of the caravan, 500 men, each dressed in expensive silk from Persia and Yemen, each carrying a staff made of solid gold, each staff weighing around 6 pounds. These were his heralds, the welcome party that walked ahead of him into every city. Behind them, Musa himself, on horseback, surrounded by his generals, scholars, and court. Then, thousands of soldiers, thousands of servants and officials, scholars, physicians, musicians, and cooks. His senior wife, Inari Kunati, made the journey too, with her own 500 maids-in-waiting. And then came the camels, 80 camels, each one loaded with gold. Contemporary accounts record that each camel carried between 50 and 300 pounds of gold dust. The total is staggering. Historical estimates suggest the caravan carried somewhere between 8 and 18 metric tons of gold. That is not money Musa was transporting to keep safe. That was his spending money for the trip. The whole caravan stretched so far across the desert that, according to accounts, you couldn't see from one end to the other. The journey took months. Crossing the Sahara Desert meant brutal heat, scarce water, and bandits. People and animals died along the way. Still they walked. By July 1324, the caravan arrived at the outskirts of Cairo. Cairo in 1324 was the most powerful city in the Islamic world, a metropolis of roughly 1 million people. It was ancient and cosmopolitan and had seen conquerors, caliphs, and armies. Nothing had prepared it for this. Musa camped his 60,000 people near the pyramids of Giza for 3 days before entering the city. Think about that image. The pyramids were already nearly 4,000 years old when Mansa Musa arrived. They were then, as now, the most astonishing structures humans had ever built. And at their base, a new city had appeared overnight. 60,000 souls, hundreds of camels, mountains of gold. Musa stayed in Cairo for 3 months, and in those 3 months he gave. He gave gold to every official he visited. He gave to mosques. He gave to scholars. He gave generously to strangers he passed in the streets. Arab historian Al-Omari, writing about what people in Cairo told him 12 years after the visit, it recorded these words: "This man spread upon Cairo the flood of his generosity. There was no person, no holder of a royal office, who did not receive a sum of gold from him." And then something unexpected happened. He gave so much gold that he flooded the gold market. Here is why that matters. Gold, like anything else, loses value when there is suddenly too much of it. It's basic economics. If everyone in your neighborhood suddenly found diamonds in their backyard, diamonds would stop being worth so much. Mansa Musa handed out so much gold in Cairo, Medina, and Mecca that the value of gold across the region dropped significantly. Al-Omari recorded that the gold mithqal, a unit of measurement, fell in value, and that Cairo's merchants were still feeling the effects 12 years later. A World History Encyclopedia records that bullion prices crashed by around 20%. To understand what that means in modern terms, imagine one visitor arriving in your country and, just by being generous, making every cent in every bank account worth 20% less for 12 years. That is what Musa did to the entire regional economy. By accident, here is a detail that I find fascinating. Musa eventually realized what he had done. So on his way home through Cairo, he tried to fix it. He borrowed back enormous quantities of gold from Egyptian moneylenders, at high interest, deliberately removing the excess from circulation to help stabilize the market. Then he repaid the full amount with interest in one single payment. He crashed the gold market, then tried to repair it, then crashed it again when he made his repayment. One man, one trip, 3 separate disruptions to the regional economy, all while completing a religious pilgrimage. He had also, during the journey, recruited people. Among the scholars and architects who returned to Mali with Musa was a man from Andalusia, the part of Spain that was then under Islamic rule, named Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, a poet and architect of great talent. Musa had met him during the pilgrimage and invited him to come back to Mali. The architect accepted. He was about to change a city. Section 5. What Musa built when he got home. When Mansa Musa returned to Mali from Mecca in 1325, he set about transforming his empire. The architect al-Sahili built the Jingareber Mosque in Timbuktu. It is still there, today, in 2024, 700 years later. People still walk through its doors for Friday prayers. That one fact alone is remarkable. Musa commissioned a building in 1327 that has now outlasted every European kingdom that existed when it was built. But the mosque was only the beginning. Under Musa's patronage, Timbuktu, previously a busy but modest trading town, became something far more extraordinary. He staffed the Sankor Mosque with scholars, jurists, astronomers, and mathematicians. He invited teachers from across the Islamic world to come and teach there. He funded libraries. He encouraged the copying and preservation of manuscripts. What grew in Timbuktu over the following decades and centuries became one of the great intellectual centers of the medieval world. At its peak, under the later Songhai Empire that succeeded Mali, the learning community of Timbuktu's 3 mosque universities housed an estimated 25,000 students. That peak came in the 16th century under Askia Daoud, building on the foundation Musa had laid. To put 25,000 students in context, Oxford University, founded in 1096, had perhaps a few thousand students at any given time in the medieval period. Paris was similar. Timbuktu was not a backwater. It was, by the measures that matter, one of the leading centers of human knowledge in the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries. There is one detail about Timbuktu's intellectual culture that I think is more powerful than any statistic. In Timbuktu, books were the ultimate status symbol. The Tarikh al-Fatash, a 17th century historical chronicle of the city, records that the king once purchased a great Arabic dictionary for the equivalent price of 2 horses. Think about what that tells you about what a society values. In most of history, the people who showed off their wealth bought expensive horses, fine clothes, or grand buildings. In Timbuktu, the most prestigious thing a wealthy person could own was a personal library. Scholars were celebrities. A great private collection of books was a mark of the highest social status. Modern equivalent, imagine a city where the most admired people were not those with the biggest houses or the fastest cars, but those who had read the most books and could speak about them with the deepest understanding. That was Timbuktu. And the result of that culture? Between 300,000 and 700,000 manuscripts from that era have survived in Timbuktu to this day. Scholars are still studying and translating them. They cover law, theology, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, history, and philosophy. Ancient African scholarship, preserved on paper, waiting to be read. Section 6. The world noticed. And what followed Musa's pilgrimage had one consequence he never intended and could not have foreseen. It put Mali on the map, literally. The Catalan Atlas of 1375, the map we began with, appeared 50 years after Musa's death, and it still showed him as the dominant figure of the African continent. Merchants in Morocco, scholars in Egypt, and eventually merchants and explorers in Europe read accounts of what Musa had done in Cairo. The story spread. There is an empire south of the Sahara. Its king is the richest man in the world. His country overflows with gold. European powers began sending expeditions to find it. The Portuguese arrived on the West African coast in the 1400s. They were looking in part for the source of the gold that Musa had spent so visibly in 1324. What came next? Centuries of slave trading, colonial conquest, and the extraction of Africa's wealth by European powers is one of the most devastating chapters in human history. It is not Musa's fault. He was a 14th century ruler making a religious pilgrimage. He could not have known what his display of wealth would set in motion generations later. But history requires us to acknowledge the full picture, however uncomfortable the connections are. Section 7. The Fall. After Mansa Musa died around 1337, the empire he had built began to weaken. His successors were not as capable. Internal rebellions broke out. The rising Songhai Empire to the east began absorbing Mali's territory. The great cities, Timbuktu, Gao, passed out of Mali's control over the following decades. By the 15th century, the golden age of Mali was over. In 1591, a Moroccan army invaded and sacked Timbuktu. Scholars were arrested and exiled. Libraries were looted. The manuscripts that had taken generations to produce and collect were hidden in the ground, buried under floorboards, tucked inside walls, by families desperate to protect them. Some were saved, many were lost. And then, in 2012, militants in the region attacked the Ahmed Baba Institute in Timbuktu, one of the archives still holding thousands of ancient manuscripts. Scholars, librarians, and ordinary citizens formed human chains, hiding books in rice sacks and transporting them to safety in cars. Over 300,000 manuscripts were rescued before the destruction reached them. Even in 2012, people were willing to risk their lives to protect what Musa had built. That is a legacy. Section 8. The reflection and what this means for us. Go back to that map for a moment, the Catalan Atlas, 1375. A European cartographer, with every reason to ignore what lay south of the Sahara, chose instead to place a black king at the very center of the world. Not because he was being generous, because it was the truth. Here is what I want you to sit with. Today, when most of us think about the Middle Ages, we think about European knights and castles. We think about the Crusades. We think about the Black Death. We think about kings and cathedrals and the church. We do not typically think about an empire in West Africa that sat on nearly half the world's gold supply. We do not think about a king so wealthy that his shopping trip, his act of generosity during a religious pilgrimage, destabilized a major regional economy for more than a decade. We do not think about a city called Timbuktu that became one of the world's great centers of scholarship, whose libraries survived invasions and militants because ordinary people kept choosing to protect them. The question worth asking is, why not? The answer is not comfortable. For centuries, and the history taught in schools, especially in the Western world, focused heavily on certain civilizations and largely left out others. Africa was often presented as a place where history happened to people, not by them. Mansa Musa's story challenges that directly. Here is the modern parallel that matters most. We all grow up with a mental picture of the world. Who built things, who invented things, who was powerful, who mattered. That picture is built from the stories we're told. If key stories are left out, the picture's wrong. Not just incomplete, wrong. A map with a whole continent missing doesn't just have a gap. It gives you false confidence that what you can see is everything there is. That is what happens when we tell history without Mansa Musa, without the Mali Empire, without Timbuktu. And we end up with a map that's missing something. So here is the legacy line I want to leave you with. Mansa Musa did not become extraordinary when historians finally started writing about him again. He was extraordinary in 1324. He built universities and mosques that are still standing. He governed an empire of millions across an area larger than Western Europe. He hosted scholars, supported science, and funded an intellectual culture so strong that even after 2 invasions, even after centuries of neglect, its manuscripts are still being studied today. The Catalan Atlas was drawn 700 years ago, and it got it right. He was the richest and most noble king in all the land. We just forgot to keep telling the story. Now you know it. Pass it on. What surprised you most about this story? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more stories the history books left out, subscribe. There are so many more to tell.